And welcome back. Next up is a panel discussion. XR breaks the mold, innovation, disruption, and hashtag boss ladies. As the immersive media industry takes shape, we're finding it breaks the mold in more ways than one. Storytellers are embracing new formats and matching them with new narrative mechanisms. These immersive stories leverage alternative funding models and new distribution channels like location-based and VR storefronts. Without an industry status quo, leading women are stepping up to blaze trails in immersive media. And there will be a Q&A session at the end of this talk, so if you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to enter it in the text chat. And please join me.
Hey everyone. Looks like we've got everyone up on the stream. Thank you all for joining our panel. We're super excited to be here today to talk about innovation, immersive media, and how this is offering opportunity for disruption. So before we get started, I wanted to make sure to introduce myself and my co-panelists. First of all, my name is Sarah Vick. I am an executive producer at Intel Studios, where we produce immersive media content that breaks all the molds, I can assure you. I am joined by Amy LaMeyer, who is a managing partner at the WXR Fund, investing in early stage companies with female leadership that are transforming businesses and human interaction using spatial computing, definitely pushing forward disruption there. Ruthie Doyle, who is an artist and a filmmaker. And Ruthie is currently serving as the interim director of the Sundance Institute's New Frontier Labs program, which means she gets the chance to see some of the leading edge cases of how film and storytelling more broadly are being disrupted today. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, is Amelia Winger-Bearskin is an artist and technologist who helps communities leverage emerging technologies to affect positive change in our world. She's a developer evangelist for Contentful and personally one of my favorite disruptors in the space. So please, thank you ladies for joining, and excited to get started with today's panel. Before we dive into the first questions, I wanted to set the stage and say, well, what is disruption? So disruption is really defined as, by Merriam-Webster, thank you, to interrupt the normal course or unity of. And that, I think, is a great example of what XR and immersive media means. So what does the X in VR or XR even mean? It's the variable in the equation. It means augmented, mixed, virtual, a whole variety of different interpretations there. But I think for this group, it's fundamentally the experimental nature of the medium and its non-conforming rules and ways. So without further ado, that's kind of to set the stage. I'd love to toss this over to Amy to answer what does disruption mean to you, and start the conversation from there.
Yeah, so I think, to me, the most exciting part about disruption is the very basic providing a solution to a problem that hasn't been solved that way before. A lot of people, I think, would take a bigger view of disruption and say that it's transforming a particular industry in a way that hasn't been solved in that particular way. But I like to think about it even at the smallest level of how are we solving problems now in a way that we didn't before.
Absolutely. Ruthie, Amelia, anything to add?
I like this concept that people have been tossing around about moving at the speed of need. And I like that pairing disruption with need and really having that focus on whether it's your customer or your audience or technologists. What is it that we need? And the moment that we can pair that with someone else whose need that's solving, I believe that that's the magic recipe for disruption. If you have an idea that's too early, that no one needs it yet, that's great. You can do a lot of amazing research and you can pave the ground for some ideas that will disrupt in the marketplace. But until you have a need, that's what I think the key to disruption is moving at that speed of need.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, we've been thinking a lot about inclusive spaces and whose voices we're hearing. So how is that disruption happening indeed? Working across silos, pairing artists and technologists and scientists, because technologists and scientists are also artists, making sure that we're including a variety of voices, that we're not just designing for justice, but we're also making better products, making better art, having something that looks more like the world around us. So for me, I would say that that's really crucial to the work that we're doing when we're thinking about disruption, and inclusion itself being a kind of disruption to the status quo.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the point that you made that scientists and technologists are also artists is a great one. And I'm going to use that to launch into kind of how are you guys seeing immersive media disrupt your specific industries, or what industries are you seeing get disrupted by this?
One of my favorite ones is healthcare. It's being disrupted on lots of different levels. Anything from training to treating therapy and phobias, to PTSD, chronic pain, physical therapy, just across the board, looking for new ways to help people with their health. In particular, there's a company that we've invested in called Embodied Labs. And so they've rethought what it means to have a medical condition, what it means to treat the medical condition, and then what it means to actually train somebody to treat that medical condition. And so I find that to be just a great example of disrupting how things were done before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ruthie.
Well, that really also shows the power of some of these new mediums that we're working with too, these kind of fourth industrial revolution technologies, as the World Economic Forum called it, these technologies that are bridging the divide between the physical human body and the digital. We had a piece at New Frontier at the Sundance Festival, specifically looking at ways that traditional physical therapists paired up with roboticists, with VR makers, scientists, to actually help folks gain some mobility. So they weren't necessarily able to walk again, folks who are paraplegic, but they were able to gain some freedom, for example, with toileting, which is a pretty major quality of life issue. So I think that shows the power that we're working with now of these technologies pairing with the body. I mean, healthcare is a really exciting one. And another one that we've been thinking about a lot is artificial intelligence. I mean, it's coming at us fast in ways that I think haven't quite captured the larger consciousness yet, even though certainly, some of the larger tech companies it's captured their consciousness, but we're just now kind of learning and understanding what our data means. So that's also, I think, an exciting place to really think about for artists and for people who are wanting to kind of make interventions in the space.
Yeah. And Amelia, you get to sit watching kind of how the content world is getting disrupted by this space. What are some of your favorite ways that you're seeing that happen?
Well, I really like when VR can solve complex problems. I think, to echo what Ruthie and Amy talked about, there's deep need within science, but there's also the social spaces as well, and the ways that we can decide to experience our built environment, ways that we can affect it. I got to be part of a project with Idea New Rochelle in New York, where we built a citizen toolkit to help citizens use AR and VR to co-design their city with city planners. And I thought of it in the beginning as like, can we do like SimCity, but for real though, which is totally like, a very like basic concept. But I think we've all felt that like, what if I could just like Minecraft this and then see how that would look? And we can do that now. And it changes the way that we who are in the space are able to imagine our built environment. But hopefully it can also help very large groups of people within our communities do the same, and to be able to have the same type of, without the kind of skills that maybe an architect or city planner had, they still have opinions about what they'd like to see on their street, how they'd like to interact with their built environment, what kind of things that they need to have safe communities. And so I'm really excited about VR's ability to start moving into some of these more complex issues and give us solutions.
Exactly. And I think that you make a great point there around the fact that these are enhancing and kind of expanding the possibilities of ways that we can engage in some of these industries or fields. And Ruthie, you and I, had prepping for this panel, had talked about kind of the opportunities that an experimental space offer. and particularly when you're kind of breaking the norms of an industry, what that means for creators and designers and technologists. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you kind of see as the opportunity that this kind of changing the status quo offers?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, you know, I can say all I want that it's important to design for justice, and I do think that's a moral imperative and it's the right thing to do, but I don't think that's going to capture everybody's interest or that everyone will believe that that's the case. I think we can also talk about making a business case for it. You know, in the media world, for example, we've got the vast majority of films still have a protagonist who is a white man, which is kind of the classic, right? But those small percentage of pieces that have people of color at the helm and people of color on screen actually made a large portion of the market money-wise. So, you know, when we kind of shift the perspective slightly, we actually see that we can make an argument for a business case as well and better products. And we see people who are experimenting and kind of bringing to light, not only for the community, which I think is important for the public to kind of have a better understanding, but also kind of piquing the imagination of computer scientists. So Stephanie Dinkins, for example, is kind of known for her conversations with Bina 48, which is a social robot. And she was just kind of, you know, following this kind of artistic curiosity, scrolling through YouTube, looking for a robotic arm, you know, manufacturing robotic arm. There's a choreography that happens with those robotic arms. And just on the sidebar, she noticed Bina 48 and went, wait a second, that robot's a Black woman, and Stephanie Dinkins is also a Black woman. And she, you know, kept pulling that thread, just like scientists kind of pull that thread and artists pull that thread in their own way. And she's not a computer scientist, but she's somebody that has that kind of approach to technology, that curiosity, and discovered that, you know, in conversation with Bina, that part of her identity wasn't part of it. Her identity of being a Black woman wasn't built in. And the engineers who work with her, it's not that they're, you know, they're against it or they felt it wasn't important. They just said, you know, she didn't talk about that in our interviews. And so I didn't feel comfortable talking about Black woman's identity as a straight, white, middle-aged man. And so that didn't become a part of it. So in her conversations with Bina, this, you know, evolving intellect AI, it actually became a part of the database and became a part of the identity of Bina, who is incredible, by the way. You should definitely check it out if you're not familiar. She's based on the actual Bina. And so she decided to embark on kind of her own project called Not the Only One, where she's kind of rethinking, well, what if we've got all of these major companies who have all this massive data about us, and they're kind of traditionally thought of the ones who can kind of play with data and create AI that has meaning and does things to and for us. But she said, you know, what would it be like if we centered a more personal data set? What would it be like if we centered Black women in the data set? So specifically, she was thinking about using her own family, so who are also Black women who identify in different ways. And so she's creating an evolving intellect AI, not as a computer scientist, but as an artist in collaboration with computer scientists working in AI, human-centered AI. So, you know, really kind of captures the imagination of the public, and it also kind of bridges that gap in terms of whose voice is being heard. What do those experiments look like? We also hear from the Indigenous AI group thinking really specifically about that wisdom around indigenous sentience. You know, human beings aren't the primal sentience, and so that really changes your outlook on approaching AI as a sentient expression of that larger ecosystem. So really kind of these kinds of wisdoms that could be really useful to us in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I think it's incredible to see kind of the folks being able to take a certain way of thinking and toss it on its head, in part because of the medium that we're working in. Amy, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of that yourself in some of the teams and companies that you're investing in and supporting. Do you want to kind of riff on what Ruthie was talking about?
Yeah, it's been really enlightening to see. We've had 3 cohorts of accelerator companies, so 26 companies over the past 2 years with female founders in the VR, AR, AI space, and really across all industries, which is such a refreshing thing to see, because that means that the innovation and that next generation of thinking is happening at all levels and not just kind of in a certain silo. It's not just retail for women. It's not just cleaning supplies. I mean, like going back to the 50s or whatever, but it's anything from healthcare to retail to oil manufacturing to entertainment, really just education, enterprise training, like just hitting all of the different levels of where we can use this three-dimensional technology to change how we work and how we communicate with each other.
Yeah, I've been curious to observe some of the folks who I see as leading in the immersive media space in the filmmaker side. And I wonder if you see some of the similar themes around, I think women sometimes and folks who come from unconventional backgrounds are almost better able to grasp what the possibilities are potentially. Have you seen, I mean, I've certainly seen that with Ilya Silak and with some of my other creators and directors be able to really embrace it in a way that I haven't been able to see from kind of more traditional directors.
I mean, I would say, I don't know if they're better able, but I think we see early on as mediums are developing, before there's kind of a return on investment, we have a lot more experimentation that looks a lot more like the world we live in. So, we've got 500 years of mass media with the printing press. We've got 100-something years of moving image media with film, and we've got some pretty big, ecosystem issues in terms of whose voice we're hearing. But we see a lot of really fertile experimentation from a lot of different kinds of people early on. And as we get more of that kind of investor interest, it starts to look more homogenous. So that's really exciting about the work that Amy's doing, for example, kind of making that intervention into what that process looks like.
Yeah. And really just, I think diversity as a whole is what's important, right? Getting that sense of everyone's voices, because we're creating this next computing platform. And so it should be created by everyone for everyone. At least that's my general opinion. The more voices that you get in the mix, the more it'll be created for those people. So,
yeah. I think that you made a great point around the New Rochelle experience and how that really was designed for a community that isn't necessarily always in the XR conversation. I don't know if you want to tell a little bit more about that experience or others that are like that.
Sure. I mean, it was very fun because we wanted to build a toolkit that other people in other cities could use. But we also wanted to make sure that our data, we had ways in which people could capture data from their communities that would be able to move out into all parts of their communities. So part of the toolkit was, how do you equip a van to be a room scale VR so that you could use a simple U-Haul that you rent for that day, turn it into something that you could drive to every neighborhood, and how do you announce? So luckily cities are very good at organizing people to get together, to have an opinion about something. They do charrettes, they do design kind of systems. So we said, okay, you can use those same systems. You might just add a van that has room scale in it. You might just make sure you also have, and they already have, a lot of cities already have iPads. They already have a lot of devices. So we're like, okay, great. You already have those devices. Make sure that they're charged. You can kind of connect them to these other 360 video headsets, or you can also use them as AR. Maybe you just need a table. Here's some recommendations on the size of the table and how to center it and all those kind of things. So part of our toolkit was also like, how do you utilize these institutions that are already very healthy and connected to our community, like libraries and other educational spaces like schools or PTA groups? How do you kind of connect them? And we said, you could teach a class about AR to children and then include their parents and then ask all of them if they'd like to join the truck that's going to be on the lawn of the library at the farmer's market. And then all of these things kind of build on each other. And that was part of the toolkit too. It wasn't just a GitHub repo. It was also just how community organizers could look at that and say, oh yeah, I know how to do all of these things. Okay, I just add these couple of more things, and that's not even that much on my budget line. Great. And then they can start doing these same types of educational charrettes, but also like design thinking charrettes, and kind of building them through that process. And we were part of the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, and we were recipients of the $1 Million Prize from Michael Bloomberg. And it was actually IDEO that created this prize, and my dear friend like Fred Dust was part of that. And they did a great job of doing that meta thinking, so that they said, here's this beautiful system that then you can help cities start thinking inside of. And then that's what we then competed against other cities for this prize for. And so there's a lot of people involved in those stages where you have someone like Fred Dust saying, okay, this is design thinking. We wrote a book about this. This is design thinking for cities. Then you have people like Amelia that are like, okay, this is AR, VR toolkits for citizens. Add that to your design thinking, since cities are already starting to move in that direction. And so if you can work in concert with these other processes across the globe, you can really allow AR and VR to be something that can connect to these complicated systems. But it does take that communication and that understanding of the communities that you're trying to help moving at that speed of need.
It's such a good learning to be able to take, I think one of the challenges we've definitely seen is that with XR, or like the augmented reality, virtual reality space, how does it interface into existing worlds that we're already familiar with, that already have an established channel, and actually putting a little effort into making sure that there's glue there to stick those pieces together is such an interesting point, that it does take a little bit more of a layered approach to get that done. We've certainly, I think my team right now is actually learning around how do we take our more expensive, like data-rich environments and make them accessible for people at home through channels that do exist. We just had Queer Skins: A Love Story, which is a volumetric film created by one of our creative partners, the Queer Skins team in New York, launch on Oculus. Really exciting that that's now actually available for people to view. But it takes a lot of work and thinking to be able to make those things come together. So I don't know if there's other lessons that other folks on this panel have seen. I'm finding that I needed to design that in from the start.
Yeah.
When do we think about that? Who do we bring in? Any lessons you guys have thought about?
Well, I love that you brought up Ilya's project, Queer Skins, because we were both at the Oculus Launchpad the same year when she and I both kind of entered this space, and it was like this boot camp where you go to Facebook and you like meet Palmer Luckey and all that, like learn about these things. And she's like, I'm a doctor, but I want to say something in this space, and I want to look at how this could maybe help my patients or tell different types of stories. And at the time I was working with an AI for XR project, and it was so important that group, which was specifically targeting diverse people from diverse backgrounds, it was so important to be able to sit there and have a conversation with a doctor about what VR meant when I was coming from this like data-driven AI perspective. And that launchpad was such a, just looking at all of the people from that launchpad and all the amazing places that they've gone, I'm like, wow, what an incredible 3-day experience, but it generated so much of like value within our community. And that was really special. I hope we continue to make, that possible. I know that you're doing that, Sarah, by being a champion, and Amy and Ruthie as well. But thanks for bringing that up. I just love remembering that amazing weekend I spent with her. So yeah.
Yeah, Amy, I'm sure you see some similar like synergies and thought sharing in some of your accelerators too, because you're bringing people from all different industries to tackle with similar tool sets, but really different problems.
Yeah, and I think networking is really an important component of this, of having us all grow. And that's across, technology companies like yours and like Oculus, but also the Accentures and the Deloittes out there, and the brands. A lot of the bigger businesses that maybe have some more funding or at least connections, or could be, trial customers for certain products. Having those connections and getting that ecosystem working, I think is really important for people that are in startup mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And those connections can be really challenging to make, but events like AWE Online can sometimes help facilitate them too. So thank you to the organizers for continuing to push forward, which actually is a good transition to think about this moment, because I think we've all been acknowledging the disruption that's present in our moment. And I thought it might be nice to talk about some of our favorite disruptions that we've seen and had joyful. can start with the fact that this morning, to get geared up for this panel, I participated in the live stream Sophie Tucker daily stream at 1 o'clock. If you are into dance or house music and you haven't checked out the either Twitch or it's also on Facebook Live, Sophie Tucker live stream every day at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. So you're definitely just with your coffee in one hand and dancing in the living room in the other. But other folks want to jump in with their favorite examples?
Well, sure. I will jump in because we just made a comment when we started that I have this whole rig here with my podcasting setup. And an interesting thing that happened to me is I'm a MIT co-creation fellow with the Mozilla Foundation. And I had a project around doing ethics in software and how to create software dependencies based on indigenous co-created ethics. And a lot of it I had planned to be at MIT and to be interviewing and working closely with a lot of the open source community and the legal community there around like the core guts of what open source was. But then, I'm sheltering in place in Oakland. And I actually decided to start a podcast as a way to connect with all of my, the people that I was doing co-creation and research with. So I created a podcast called wampum.codes. And it's funny because I'm used to working in very advanced media. Podcasts is like radio, this is like we're like moving backwards back in time. But podcasting has been an incredible experience for me, and not alone. I feel like we've had an explosion of incredible content in podcasts. The company I work for, Contentful, was like really excited to start a podcast as well. I feel like I'm podcasting all the time, but I love it. I love listening to podcasts. I love seeing the different ways that people are performing through them, that they're connecting, that the ideas that are generating. I'm such a big supporter of co-creation and deep co-creation with, within different cultures as well. And so I love the sound of being able to connect with ideas while I'm walking in nature and taking myself outside of the screen. And I think a lot of us who are in XR want to break free of the screen. And that's why we love this computational space, but it also means we love nature. I know all the women on this panel love nature, but it can be something that we can think of extended reality and enhancing that connection we have with nature and connecting with the world around us. And I know we're getting there. I know we're getting there with XR, and it's just a beautiful thing. And I'm happy to also be connecting with some old, more traditional media like sound, because it does help me think about that world that I want to see with XR.
And that'll grow with spatial audio too, right?
Absolutely.
Like the sound is an old, but yet having the new elements of how, as it becomes more dimensional and more ambisonic, how will that change our hearing experience? I'm excited about that.
Me too.
Absolutely.
I love all the ways that, I love all the ways that people are coming together, to create community. Like Amy was saying before, networking being so important. And, there was the article that the internet is nice again. So we're, like you said, it's all these existing platforms. And as we're all moving online, here we are making that transition. We're kind of using some traditional tools in a new way to find each other in a really lovely way that I think is working. And we're finding those ways to connect as much as we are missing everything that might be possible. But in terms of something that might be available on XR, I was really excited about The Under from Tinderclaws. It's available on Oculus. They're really exploring some exciting ways of doing world building and having kind of an expansive world and live performance. I think they've been adopting text for performance, but also just ways of meeting each other in an immersive space, which is really exciting. They're doing a lot with it right now, especially with everybody looking for those kinds of spaces to convene.
Yeah, for sure. And just to add on to that, lots going on in virtual venues and virtual spaces, a lot of growth, explosive growth there. So that's really exciting. Charlie Fink has a new book out. I think he announced it today about, I think he looked at 100 different spaces. I'm gonna plug my event tomorrow with Verizon and Mozilla Hubs. And that's about 5G and music and fan experiences, and how do you enable closer fan experiences with immersive tech. I think that's a really exciting space as well, and pretty important right now considering we're physically distant.
Absolutely. So I've got kind of two more questions to lead us with before we switch over to Q&A. And I think one of them is, as we think about this industry maturing and kind of getting more and more folks involved in it, and definitely seeing more and more people being able to access immersive experiences, what are some of the things that you all think about each day that will make sure that we're building for everybody in the community and also enabling everybody in the community to build? I think I'd be curious to hear folks' thoughts.
I think a lot about the allies that we have that encourage diversity, and diversity is a lot more than gender. Obviously, I mean, it's age, it's physical ability, it's sexual preference, it's culture, it's race, it's so many things. So diversity is obviously just bigger than gender, but definitely thankful for all the male white allies that we have that continuing to step up and say, you know what, I'm not going to be on a panel of all white men, and just continuing to support and suggest some diverse conversation. I also think it's important for all of us to mentor people that are less experienced and help them develop their voice and provide opportunities for them to get more engaged.
Awesome.
I like to think of this. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, and I mean, we're a very white panel. We're all women, right? But we've got some Indigenous representation. We've got some queer folks. So we've got a lot of other kinds of representation. But we can always do better. I think I like that. I love that idea that you're putting out there of diversity and inclusion is not just about race or gender or the things that we normally think about, but also age, working across silos, inviting artists in, like I mentioned earlier, and not only inviting people who speak different languages than us, who have some other kind of métier or field of expertise, not only inviting them in, but actually listening to what they say and leaving room in your process to be able to listen to what they say, not to kind of invite them at the end and be like, well, that was nice to hear that perspective. It's all already figured out. So that's not really a true invitation. I think that's just, insincere at best. So I think really it's about kind of that collaboration in a really true way that leaves space for those other ideas.
Yeah.
I love that meme that's been going around lately that says if something is inaccessible to the poor, it's neither radical nor revolutionary. And I like to think about that because if we're not imagining how this space could extend and can extend a benefit to all, it's very limited. It's not very radical. It's not very revolutionary. It can fall into that space. And I myself have been in VR for so long. So many of us have been in that research space for so long. Since the 90s, I've been able to have a giant helmet on my head in a massive simulation room in a research environment. And it was really exciting that at this point in my life, I get to see so many more people have access to that are not professors or researchers, right? And that's really that's exciting to me. That's what's kept me around and that's what's kept me excited. And I also hope that we can expand the way that we think about creation in this space. And I want it to be more co-creative. I want us to be able to think outside of like, a lot of times people are trying to say, okay, how is this like a startup? How is this like a film crew? How is this like a traditional, star vehicle? Or like maybe it's not, and maybe it has space and room for more co-creation, and we can think of it as being a new hybrid space, not just in the way that we serve this new hybrid audience, but the way that we actually create this. Maybe artists and technologists and business interests can have a much stronger connection in the ecosystem and not have them be so separate. Maybe more of that community can benefit from that reach into those audiences. I think we need new models. We've known that for a long time, that our current ways in which we are supporting artists and the way that we're supporting filmmakers is it limits who is allowed to participate.
Absolutely.
And I think that thinking about using that word ecosystem is very important. That a healthy ecosystem has a little of all different kinds of things. It's not that we're saying it should now be, I had someone say, well, I'm a straight white man, there's no room for me anymore then. It's like, no, we're not saying we should just tip the balance the other way. We're saying it should be more equitable, but also an ecosystem that has, the indie makers as well as the corporate makers. And there is a healthy balance between all the different kinds of folks who are making, and that they respect each other.
Yeah, and we're seeing that our customers, our audience, our clients, whoever you may call them, they're not locked into one channel. They want an omni-channel message and experience that goes across their listening device, their Alexa, their phone, their headset, and their laptop, and they want it to meet them where they are. They no longer are going to tolerate our silos. And so, we already are in an ecosystem, whether we like it or not, right?
Absolutely. And I loved your point, Ruthie, around making sure that you're thinking about when you're going to have those voices join in your process. And then I think, Amelia, some of your points around co-creation and just designing from co-creation as your objective to start, rather than saying, oh, let's make this first look just like a startup in this little box and then move forward. We've definitely seen in our own process of creating immersive films at Intel Studios, the entire directorial process is completely put on its head. And the way that you think about how do you test experiences, how do you get audiences to look at them? Like, we're going through a process talking to the MPAA to get ratings put on some of our works for the first time. And even the thought of, well, how do you approach a panel full of raters and when they've only ever seen film before? And that's also a generational shift for a lot of those folks too. So absolutely, some of these points, I love them. I guess the last thing that I'd love to hear from everyone is, what are you most excited about either seeing disrupted, or the disruptive thing you are most excited to see in the next year as we keep moving forward?
So personally, I'm a huge music fan. I probably see over 100 bands usually live a year. And so speaking of things being turned on their head, like this time has been really interesting to see all of the live performances, but streamed on video. But I just think that there's another level that we can have there in terms of connection of artists and the people that are consuming the art. So I'm really, really interested to see what's going on there. That being said, I'm also totally fascinated about where we're going to go with all of the healthcare stuff and education and enterprise productivity. So I can't just say one. it's at least 4, if not more. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity right now. And really what I'm the most excited for is this bump I think we're going to get, this creative and innovative bump that we're getting from the need, to whoever said that earlier. The need is there, right, to communicate better than just on a Zoom call. So what can we do with this time in terms of innovation to fill that need?
Absolutely.
I've been very pleased to see that thus far VR has stayed really weird. Like, it's been weird since the moment I've entered into it, and thank goodness it's kept me around, because I'm a weirdo and I love this space for that reason. It seems to attract a lot of people that like to think orthogonally and who have deep love and interests and yet can express them to large groups. And I love that. I mean, as both like a developer and an artist, it just really tickles my brain that we've kept so many weirdos going, and I just hope that we can continue to keep the weirdness of this medium. And I think, honestly, that's what will be the key to it really resonating with audiences, and like people keep saying, oh, it's going to catch on this way, it's going to catch on that way. And I think the key to that really is meeting it at that human space, and that's that weirdness. It has to be a little bit surreal, because you're wanting to push something past its logical limits and enter into the human realm of the body and the experiential, and that's beautiful. And I just hope we keep that.
I think mine got kind of taken by these brilliant thinkers. So I will say something that is true, is that I hope that we can find a better work balance. This is my hope always. We did a world building exercise where we talked about what's a job that you could do that doesn't exist, that could exist in the future. And I said, could we have, instead of a GDP, could there be a wellness index or a well-being index? Now we're all saying, okay, well, there's no reason why we can't do remote work. But what does flexible work look like? Not just remote. I think many of us who are parents are seeing that it's not a work-life balance this way either. We've kind of shifted into other issues. But I think there's some really interesting use case here about how we can make work more sustainable in our lives, and there's no excuse not to, and that we can continue to have that be, again, a justice issue and a well-being issue, but also a good business case.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of extend the blurring of lines theme, I've been really inspired to see how art is influencing lives and lives are influencing art. Some of the artistic expressions that have come out over the past 2-3 months and how they've been embraced in the public consciousness, I've found really enthralling and also inspiring to be able to see how that can impact our own lives and bring both joy and thought-provoking concepts into our day-to-day. So I think that Andrew is supposed to come back and host Q&A.
Oh, and he appears.
Oh. Hey, Brian.
Hello. Yeah, there's a
Hello.
panel. There was lots of. We're running a bit low on time, but maybe one question. Can you give an example of your favorite pieces of AI content that we created recently, since more diverse creators received access to tech firms?
Sure. So can you just, it was the favorite piece of X content or AI content?
Well, the question was AR content, but I guess any sort of.
Yeah, so one of my favorite pieces of AR content, this is a little Boston geeky, but the Boston Red Sox put on 2 lenses onto Snapchat, where you can now go behind the green monster. And if you are at all a Red Sox fan or from Boston, you know that the green monster is a major icon in the Boston public consciousness. And it was put out by the Red Sox as kind of a "we miss you" and "stay strong, Boston strong" message. So that's my favorite from the past couple of months.
And does the panel have any concerns about walled content gardens and how that may shape which voices and experiences will get visibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Amelia, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about kind of like the different platforms and how you're seeing the content world emerge?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the work that I'm doing at Contentful is working with leading brands and game companies and lots of different media companies and thinking about their omni-channel message. And I think that we are seeing a really big shift in everyone figuring out how to meet their customers and users where they are. And I hope that the ecosystem can be tech forward and can be API forward so that we can have those kind of access walls meet people in the same way. I love Mozilla Hubs, for instance. That's a great example, is the ability. I went to ITP at NYU, so did Ruthie, and they just had their senior show and then the after party in Mozilla Hubs, and that was just really fun to see people's avatars dancing next to their AR piece that you could watch in VR. It was like so meta, where I'm like in VR watching somebody's AR project in VR on a pedestal, but it was an enormous amount of fun and the kind of excitement that the students brought, celebrating their graduation, since they have that alternative space to do it in, and so I think this year, I'm probably more positive than I've ever been that those walled gardens are really moving and changing, and we're embracing that open source ethos, and to the benefit of a lot of businesses that are able to meet their customers in positive ways for their bottom line as well. So I'm positive.
People are hungry for that.
Great.
People are hungry to connect.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, we're right out of time. I'm really sorry. I'm sure this conversation will be. Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you. We will see you.